The Lex Friedman podcast with Charles just dropped. We've all been waiting a long time for this, and it was a really important step toward mainstream exposure for Cardano. But maybe more importantly, it contained some really interesting revelations about exactly why Cardano is doing so well right now, while so many ecosystems are struggling so hard. Ready? Let's go. This interview with Lex was a sprawling 5-hour podcast. 5 hours. So we're going to cut it up, and they covered everything, all the way from the philosophical foundations of Cardano all the way up to very, very specific things. So we're going to cut it up into a couple different videos. In the meantime, we're also coming up on 100 straight days of Army of Spies videos. This series of videos is the Cardano Rumor Rundown, and we will have done it for 100 straight days, not having missed a single day since St. Patrick's Day. To celebrate this, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but to celebrate this, I thought it might be kind of fun if we had not an AMA, not Ask Me Anything, but Ask Me Some Things, and AMST, Ask Me Some Things. Reason being, I think people realize the Army of Spies is not me. It's all of you. It's all of us being involved in this Cardano ecosystem together. That's what Army of Spies is all about. And I've tried to go to great lengths to not make it about me, to make it about all of us together. So it's an Ask Me Some Things because I'm going to avoid the questions that are about me. It would be really fun for me to answer those questions because I think, questions about my academic background, my professional background, what things I do outside of this podcast, I think you would probably be interested and like a lot of those answers. But I don't want to make this about me. I want to make it about all of you, all of us together, because all of us together, we're the Army of Spies. So feel free to send me questions to armyofspiesblack@gmail.com. armyofspiesblack@gmail.com. That's the email address that I answer. Other people involved in Army of Spies answer other similar Army of Spies emails. Army of Spies Black is me. Send me questions there in between now and the 100th episode. And somewhere around the 100th episode, we're going to try to answer those questions. Army of Spies Black, no punctuation, just Army of Spies Black @gmail.com. Also, if you are interested in getting a hardware wallet, which I highly recommend to protect your Cardano, there is an affiliate link down below for the Ledger Nano devices. I've used Ledger Nano S's for years for multiple cryptocurrencies. Excellent product, highly recommend it. If you are interested in getting really delicious coffee at really great prices, which I'm a huge enthusiast of, there is also an affiliate link to Fresh Roasted Coffee LLC. Great prices, great coffee. Hit those guys up. Finally, we even have Army of Spies hoodies and t-shirts. Let's not bury the lead here. Let's get right to the punchline that sort of pervades this entire romping 5 hours of discussion. It's really obvious when you watch this podcast that these two enjoy talking to each other because they're both super smart and they both understand certain principles that I think sort of underpin both of their lives. But the really important punchline for us in Cardano and maybe for the entire crypto space is explained by Charles like this, right? So throughout this interview, he's kind of hitting these points, but here's the way I'm going to summarize it. Charles basically says, when you're building something like this, philosophy is the first domino you kick over, right? It's going to be this, IOHK slogan, cascading disruption. And the first domino you kick over is proclaiming the philosophy of the project. And then you build a community around that project, a community and an ecosystem based on the philosophy. So you proclaim the philosophy and then you build a community and ecosystem around that philosophy, right? And then the people participating in the project are the people who believe in that philosophy. They join the project because of the philosophy. And then here's an important point. You actually let that ecosystem self-evolve. That sounds like a game plan that almost anybody would instantly get behind, right? And if you think about the internet, This is kind of why the internet spread like a virus and created so much innovation. I mean, there's always been this in the modern internet, anyways, maybe not in the DARPANET days, but in the modern internet, it's always been this ethos of the free flow of information, right? And anybody could go and build on top of the internet. I built a website in 1997 as part of a class, an academic class I was doing, right? Even back in 1997, somebody like me could build a website. And it's always been this sort of ability for the internet to self evolve. That's why it's been so viral and spawned so much innovation. So then you have to ask the question like, okay, well, if this game plan that's so easy to get behind is so central to the immense growth that Cardano's experienced, how do you differentiate the situation with Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Aren't Bitcoin and Ethereum doing the same thing? I would argue no. Bitcoin has refused to do one of those three steps, and Ethereum has completely screwed up one of those three steps. Let's start with Bitcoin. So, Bitcoin certainly had a foundational philosophy. Satoshi's white paper definitely kicked over the first domino on a philosophy, right? This philosophy that we can create a better money through decentralization and, a hard cap, and that it should be disinflationary, all those things that we're very familiar with. And certainly a community and an ecosystem based on that philosophy rose up around the great Bitcoin innovation. I think it's hard to argue those things. But then we get to number three. Then you let the ecosystem self evolve. Here's where Bitcoin ran into problems, right? There were many, many attempts, even described by Charles in this podcast. Charles talks about how before Ethereum, Vitalik was involved with the colored coin movement. And this was an attempt to add some level of programmability into Bitcoin. And he talks about other people involved in the ecosystem. I think he talks about Mike Hearn in the podcast, and he says like they didn't want to go out and people didn't want to go out and build other projects. They just wanted to innovate on top of Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin core developers would not hear it. They wouldn't have it. They wouldn't have anything to do with adding this programmability. They wouldn't deviate from what was already there. They wouldn't allow it to self-evolve. You could argue the same thing happened in the small block, big block debate because, Blockstream effectively controlled all the access to the core code repository, right? Nobody could create scalability in Bitcoin through larger blocks. It couldn't self-evolve. There were a handful of people who had access to the code repository. There are a handful of very powerful miners that control all the block validation. It can't actually self-evolve because this small handful of people control so much about Bitcoin. It's so centralized. With Ethereum, it's a little bit different, right? Ethereum, the same thing. You kick over the first domino, the first philosophical domino, right? Hey, why don't we add programmability to the current blockchain technology, right? Why don't you take Bitcoin and add programmability to it? Great idea, right? And an ecosystem grew up around that idea, right? Like, hey, this is great. Smart contracts could revolutionize the way we interact with each other, basically the way society is ordered, right? And this happened. So number one and number two, they were good on, and certainly Ethereum is self-evolving. But number two is where Ethereum kind of screwed up. And Charles goes into great length about this in the video. He doesn't say it in those terms, but he describes the different situation between Cardano and Ethereum. So in Cardano, everything, and even Vitalik has commented on this lately, Cardano has this academic approach where Ethereum does not, right? Ethereum cites the speed of progress that can be attained when you don't actually you don't actually put out academic papers and let other academics comment on them, right? He's like, we can move very fast. I don't know if the historical record bears that out in that Ethereum had a gigantic head start on Cardano, And Cardano is going to be launching a full Gen 3 blockchain with smart contracts faster than Ethereum. But the key distinction here is that Ethereum does not expose themselves to this wider academic world, right? Ethereum, you could argue, development on Ethereum, you've got a whole bunch of different parties, but they're all, it's like a lot of crypto people. It's very crypto centric, right? With Cardano, they put these academic papers out, right? Other academics, the world's top expert in these topics, right? Because there's a whole bunch of interdisciplinary things going on with these Gen 3 blockchains. You've got game theoretics, you've got economics, you've got cryptography, you've got mathematics, and kind of like behavioral stuff. All these things are interacting. And with Cardano, they can put out these papers and get the world's top experts to chime in and say, you guys are completely wrong. Here's my critique. Here's why your paper is completely wrong. Or they read your paper, say, hey, you have some great ideas there, and it provoked some thinking of my own. Now I'm going to go spend a year, 6 months, whatever, writing my own paper that builds on your paper, and I'm also going to publish that. In either case, whether it's academic work trying to criticize what you've done or academic work building on what you've done, you get free work, right? This is how the academic world works. And Cardano gets free work done on its protocol, on its projects, on its use cases, all these things, because they're exposing themselves not just to a core of crypto-oriented developers, right? It's not just crypto people who are exposed to the ideas of Cardano. Cardano has published like 105 papers, and all of those papers, they publish them. They go to conferences. They're peer reviewed. Academics look at them. They're out there in the wider academic world, which is much bigger than the crypto world. The crypto world is this tiny microcosm. The academic world is gigantic, right? These ideas, they're like plant life, right? If you put a plant out in the sunlight and expose it to fresh air and sunlight, it flourishes and multiplies. If you try to box it up in a cupboard where there's not a lot of light and not a lot of fresh air, it withers and dies. It's the same thing with ideas and innovation. Cardano is exposing their own ideas, their own innovation to the broader academic world. And Cardano is a part of that world. They went out and hired, some of the leading academics in the world to do various things. When it was time to figure out some game theoretic stuff with Ouroboros, they went to Oxford and hired a good game theory person to figure out the best way to incentivize the behaviors they needed within the consensus protocol in Cardano. They didn't just say, hey, we're crypto guys. We know the best way to do this. We don't need the rest of the world of science to help us, right? We know what's best. They expose themselves to the entire world. So they get the benefit of a much larger cohort of thinkers, right? And so while that takes a second, it takes a second and some effort to publish your ideas, get them peer reviewed, try to get into conferences, to be exposed to that outside world. It's a burden, and it takes a little bit of time and a lot of effort. And Ethereum chose a different route, right? For that step number 2, building a community and an ecosystem, right? And then step number 3, which you then let self-evolve. If you build too small a community, the amount of self-evolution you get is, it could end up being concomitant to the size of the community you built, right? Ethereum, you could argue they built more of a crypto-centric community, whereas Cardano, sure, they have a crypto-centric community. They also are a part of the larger academic community. There's a lot of cryptographers out there, right? A lot of mathematicians out there, a lot of game theory people out there, a lot of behavioral science people out there, much larger number of people than the number of people who are just involved in crypto. This is why Cardano is destroying so much right now, why they're doing so well compared to other ecosystems. We see, Bitcoin is struggling, right? They've been accused of being an environmental disaster. The markets aren't reacting well to the things that are going on in Bitcoin. Ethereum, right? Ethereum is, delivering Ethereum 2.0 way slower than their community would like, right? Is it any coincidence? Is it any coincidence that out of those three, Cardano is the only one that seems to be delivering on these three steps, right? These three steps of building a project that evolves by itself. I want to point out that I was a little bit disturbed partway through this podcast when I realized that 2Pen Charlie only had one pen visible. Look at this. Charles only has one pen that we can see here. I was like, is he on half power? Did he come to this super important podcast with over 1 million subscribers on half power? No, he did not. He is on full power, as we will get into in subsequent videos. I've got a ton of notes about really specific and interesting things these two discussed. We'll talk about those tomorrow.